Book of Jonah. So, over these last months, we have looked at a lot of different stories that are not new to us. We started in Genesis. Those of y'all that have been with us from the beginning, you've been with us from the beginning. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. So you have been there with us, and we've tried to look at these stories from different angles. And a lot of these stories that we've told are familiar, not just to us, but to people that don't even go to church or not Christians or don't call themselves Christians. Today's story is definitely in that category. We are in a story, excuse me, that even people that don't go to church know about Jonah and they know it. They may not know a lot of it, but they know that story. But if you'll give me liberty this morning, allow me to have a little extra time to set this book up, because it is a unique book. It really is. It's not just about Jonah and a great fish. It's fun to read, and it's enjoyable to tell to children, but there's a lot of depth to it. And there's a lot of layers. It's kind of like an onion, just layers to it. So I think after these, I'm thinking it'll take 2 weeks to get through it, because we're not going to get past chapter 1 today. I think after these 2 or 3, whatever weeks it takes to get through it, I hope that you'll look at the book of Jonah very differently. But let's note a few things about this book before we actually get into reading it. First, it's a short book. It only has 4 chapters, and it only has 48 verses. So it's not a large book. It's named after a prophet, which is not unusual, because we have a lot of books that are in this part of the Bible that are named after prophets. We have Nahum, we have Obadiah, we have Jeremiah, we have Isaiah. There's major and minor prophets here that are all in this part of the Bible. So that's not unusual. But what is unusual about it is that typically the other prophets that you see mentioned in the Bible is about, it tells what they did. This one is more about him. This book is about Jonah. It's not about what he said. It's about him. It's relating characteristics of him, and honestly, it's kind of brutal. Most of us, I would think, in this room, we call ourselves Christians, would not have a problem with this story. We take it with faith and believe what it says. And probably we have no issues with it, because we have no issues with Genesis 1:1. If you have a problem with this story, then you probably have a problem with Genesis 1:1. Because if you can't subscribe to God speaking creation into existence, then you probably can't handle this story here with a fish swallowing a man and him living for 3 days, and some other things that go along with it. So they're kind of one and the same. I've heard some Christians and even some pastors, preachers, try to help this story with explaining away some of the parts of it that seem kind of unrealistic. Like, for instance, they'll even with simplistic things like the storm that we're getting ready to read about, they'll say things like, well, in the Mediterranean, there's a lot of bad storms that can come up really, really quickly. And that's true. But as I mentioned a few weeks ago, there's supernatural and there's natural. And sometimes God uses the natural to create the supernatural. But sometimes it's just supernatural. That's just what it is. And so you need to keep that in mind as we read this story. Because this account is really, it's supernatural. And I'm going to point out those things to you as we go through it. By the way, Jesus himself staked his own reputation on this story. You have Matthew 12:40. Could you read that verse for us? Yeah. These are Jesus' words.
For as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of a huge fish, so the Son of Man will be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth.
Okay. That's Jesus staking his own purpose for being here, he's connecting himself to this story. So if you have an issue with the credibility of the story of Jonah, we need to go back to what Jesus said. Jesus tied himself into this story that compared his mission for coming, which was his death, his burial and resurrection, and 3 days in the tomb are compared to this story. So if this story isn't true, that means Jesus is a liar. If Jesus is a liar, then he's not perfect. And if he's not perfect, we know that what was required for redemption is a perfect lamb with no flaw, nothing. Then Jesus isn't qualified to be our Redeemer. So the credibility of this story is tied to our salvation, you could say, by proxy. It's a true story, and we don't need to help it. It's also just as supernatural that Jesus would be in a tomb for 3 days and come out and be alive. So they're synonymous here. They work together. By the way, does anyone I know you're probably not going to know this, but if you do, I'll be impressed. Does anyone know what city that Jonah was from?
Just talked about it last week. It was from the worst.
Well, no, can't overthink this one. He's from Nazareth. That's where Jonah's from. Does anybody know someone else that was from Nazareth? Jesus. So there's that's kind of interesting. A couple more things, and thank you for allowing me to have this time to kind of introduce Jonah, because I think that it requires it to understand it fully. I made a mistake when I was teaching this, the book of Kings, and I knew better than this, and I don't know why I made this mistake. I should have taught this lesson when we were in Kings. As most of you know, the Bible's not in chronological order. It's just not. Now, there is Bibles you can buy that are in chronological order. I don't know if y'all have ever seen one of those. And if you read it, it's kind of neat because you're reading it in the historical timeline that it all happened in. And by the way, I don't know if any of you ever looked at timelines, of biblical timelines, and I have one that maybe I should bring that's really, really cool. It's really long, and there's no way for me to hang it. In my last class that I taught, I always said I wanted a timeline that we could put alongside the class so that we could reference it. And so when I left, the class bought me this it's a huge, massive book. It's like this tall, and it spreads out, and it's got this really, really detailed timeline, chronological order of way things happen from creation all the way to Revelation. And I'm talking, it is in small writing. It is difficult. So there's no way I could hang it up here, but one of the things that you do find when you study the Bible a lot is that, and different commentaries and all that, there's certain things with the timeline that are like really definitive, but then there's a lot of, it's kind of like saying that, I'm in my 50s, but I'm 59. But I'm still in my 50s. So there's a little bit of variation sometimes. There's not always a lot of certainty on exact dates. What's interesting, and I'm one that loves to pay attention to this, sometimes you see these archaeological digs that they find in the Middle East, in places that you wouldn't expect, where they find things where there's no secular history of something that's written in the Bible, but more and more they keep finding in these archaeological digs things that substantiate the Bible. Anyway, I digress. The bottom line is that this book is not in chronological order, and I wished I would have told this when we were in 2 Kings, right in the middle, because that's when this story happens. It's in 2 Kings 15, you see a mention of Jonah in 2 Kings 15. So if I would have been smart and really paid attention, I would have interjected this, but I get caught up into just doing chapter and chapter, verse by verse, and I forget that I need to interject that. So I'm going to try to do a better job of that here in these upcoming lessons. In 2 Kings 15, where you see Jonah mentioned, the northern kingdom is still in existence. Recall last week's lesson, I told you there is no more northern kingdom. It has been captured. Does anyone remember which country captured it? Starts with an A? Assyria. Well, they're going to come into play in this story. So this is before the Assyrians capture Israel, the northern kingdom. What was the capital of the northern kingdom? Starts with an S? Samaria. Yeah. So this is before that happens. And so I just want to give you perspective. And the king that's the king during this period of time in Israel is Jeroboam II. That's who the king is. So that gives you a little idea of what happened. So I know last week we didn't have any more northern kingdom, and I'm reversing, putting us in reverse, back in the Bible bus up here, and I'm putting us back in 2 Kings. So that's the setting. So I need you to understand that. The characters that are in this story are really intriguing. And they do the exact opposite that you would think the characters would do. You're going to see the prophet of God not looking like a prophet of God. You're going to see people that were really evil being more Christian than you would expect them to be. You're even going to see in the next weeks that even the animals getting involved in the repentance. You know, it's not every day you see cows repenting. So that comes to play in this story. It's a very interesting story, and we will get more into that next week. So with all that in mind, let's go to chapter 1 of Jonah. Would someone mind reading the first 2 verses for me?
I'll do it. The word of the Lord came to Jonah, son of Amittai. Get up and go to the great city of Nineveh and preach against it, because of their wickedness has confronted me.
So all throughout the Bible, read that first verse again. What was this, the first verse?
The word of the Lord came to Jonah, son of Amittai.
And then said what?
Get up and go to the great city of Nineveh.
Okay. So all throughout the Bible, and you guys that have been with us through these last months and whatever, a year or 1.5, whatever it's been, we've seen this over and over again where God tells someone, go. This is not unusual. And it's to people that, in this case, it's someone you would expect it to be with. It's one of his prophets. But we've seen it in stories where it was just obscure people that really weren't his prophets. They weren't even people that would be associated with ministry. But I remember when I read this week, the first verse I thought of was the first verse I ever learned. Can someone read Mark 16:15 real quick? That just can turn there real quick. We'll do a Bible drill. This was the first verse I ever learned. And I was so proud. I was in kindergarten. And I remember coming home and quoting the verse from my mom. And this was my first verse. And so I thought of that verse when I read it. As soon as somebody gets it, you looking for it, Don? Just read that as soon as you can.
16:15.
Yeah.
And he said to them, go into all the world and proclaim the gospel to the whole creation.
So there's that go part that is what I remember. But it's not just enough that we go. It's go. When you see go in the Bible, there's always something that follows it. When God always kind of gives twofold commands, and I'm sure there were certain times he just said go, but most of the time it's go and here is no different. And a lot of Christians today, they got the go part down. Like for instance, they go to church, but we have a church today that, and we'll get more into that in a minute, that is, they do the go, but they don't do a lot of what they learn when they're at church. It's like going to church is enough. We've done God some great favor, at least we think we have, and we came to church. We did our weekly thing. And I know this is kind of wrong. Maybe it's judgmental and cynical of me to say this, but sometimes I wonder why people go to church. I really would like to know why they go. Is it just habit? Especially when I see people that go on a regular basis, but I see no evidence in their life that they're living out the things and the principles that they're hearing. So we are not just to go, and Jonah wasn't just to go. He was to go and cry out against Nineveh. Now, there's no reason to believe to this point that Jonah has been a disobedient prophet. At least it's not mentioned. For everything that we know of, Jonah has been a good prophet to this point and has obeyed God. And he's told to go see the Ninevites. Now, I'm not going to focus a lot this morning on the Ninevites. I know there's a ton we can say about them, but if I get in the weeds about them this morning, we won't ever get anything done. So I'm going to focus on the Ninevites, the people of the city of Nineveh, a little bit more next week. But for today, let me just talk about Nineveh, where he was told to go. So the city of Nineveh, it's in Assyria. It's the capital city it's probably, it's, I don't know if it's the largest city in Assyria, but it's one of the largest. You know, kind of like Nashville being the largest city, this is the capital, which is not unusual. I mean, not normal. Typically you think of capitals of most states, and it's not the largest city, but in Tennessee, it is. So in Assyria, this is the capital city. The population of Assyria is about 600,000. We'll see that mentioned. Well, it doesn't tell us that, but you're going to see a number that's mentioned later in Jonah that kind of gives us a reason to believe that the population is around 600,000. It became the capital of Assyria around 700 BC under King Sennacherib. We actually talked about him in the Kings a little bit earlier on, and when we were in the Kings. Remember, we talked about last week that eventually northern kingdom, Israel, would be taken captive, and it was going to be taken captive by this country, Assyria. And if you remember, we talked about not only was it going to take it captive, but they were going to take a lot of their citizens, and mainly their more affluent citizens, and we'll get into this in the book of Daniel eventually too. They would take their citizens to their country, and then what would happen is people from Assyria would come down and take over the property and assimilate into the northern kingdom. And that hasn't happened yet, but it's going to happen eventually. Okay, and so just remember, there's a reason that Jonah doesn't want to go to Assyria, because there's a lot of animosity and hatred towards Assyria, and so we're going to get into a little bit of why Noah. I'm going to say that. For some reason, I get Noah and Jonah mixed up. If I do that, just forgive me. I'm meaning Jonah. I don't know why. I've always done that with Jonah. And for some reason, Moses and Joseph, I get them mixed up too. It's just my crazy head. But this story hasn't happened yet. We still have the northern kingdom, but that's what's going on. By the way, Nineveh is also known, it has another name. It's known as the city of bloodshed. And we'll get into more detail as to why it was known about that next week. So we see there, as Pat read in verses 1 and 2, that what did it say in verse 2, Pat? Remind us, it says in verse 2.
Get up, go to the great city of Nineveh and preach against it, because their wickedness has confronted me.
Their wickedness has confronted me, or come up before me. So we need to remember something. We live in an evil world today. And I live in my own kind of sheltered world. I'm kind of like Tommy to a certain extent. She lives in a Disney World state. I at times kind of shelter myself. I like to be naive about things sometimes, because it's kind of like, for instance, I pray for my 2 grandsons, the 2 oldest ones. I pray for all of them, but the 2 oldest ones I pray for a lot. And you guys are going to get there at this stage with your kids, because they're getting to an age where they're getting ready to be exposed. And once they see something that they've never seen before, you can't erase it. It's there. And so, like, my daughter's been really, really strict with my oldest grandson, who turns 15 next month, on a cell phone. He has no access to anything. And I understand that, because once they see certain things, their world changes, and you can't undo it. And so I, to a certain extent, stay naive to a point, but I do see things and I do hear things, and I realize that sometimes I'm like, wow, that exists. We live in a really wicked world. And the reason I bring that up is because God notices it. He does. And sometimes we wonder, is God ever going to do anything? Well, if you wonder about that, don't, because this verse says, their wickedness has come up before me, and God notices. And at some point, there's a line that's crossed, and God addresses it. So just remember that God is paying attention. Somebody read verse 3 for me.
But Jonah rose up to flee to Tarshish from the presence of the Lord. So he went down to Joppa, found a ship which was going to Tarshish, paid the fare, and went down into it to go with them to Tarshish from the presence of the Lord.
Well, as you know, those of you that have been in this class, this is nothing new. We have seen people disobey God time and time and time again. Sometimes it gets depressing reading the Word of God, especially in the Old Testament. The book of Kings, we saw a lot of kings that were really evil. It'll say, so-and-so was the king and he did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. And it seems like we read that a whole lot more than we did that did what was right in the sight of the Lord. And Friday when I was on the way, I've been do a lot of praying on the way to work. And, just seeing the leaves and just seeing the beauty of the world. But then you quickly reminded how this world is affected by sin. And we live in a world that is just an evil world. We're born into sin. And so because of that, there's a lot of reminders of the sin curse. And we got to remember that God created this world and people to never die. When Adam and Eve were created, they were not created to die. Death was not part of it at all. Today, we say, well, death is part of life. Well, it is for us, but when Adam and Eve were created, it wasn't. There was no death. Once sin entered the world, then death. That's when they begin to die. Remember he said, don't eat of this tree, the day of you eat of it, you will die. Well, that's when death was introduced. And when we look at all the leaves falling, we see the leaves dying. It reminds us of death. So, back when Adam and Eve were living, there was no fall. There was no winter. It was just perpetual, beautiful weather all the time. There was no leaves turning color. There was no death. So we're reminded of death. And there's a lot of examples of evil throughout the Bible. But man, this is disobedience in a different kind of way. Yeah, we've talked about disobedience with a lot of men and women in the Bible. This is so blatant. This is God's prophet. This isn't just anybody. I know I'm not trying to elevate him too much, but this is God's spokesperson. This is what he does. It's his job to obey God. He doesn't do anything else. His job is like a spy. He's waiting on a mission. Hey, I need you to go over here and you take some pictures of this and so on. Okay, well, I got the mission. That's what he does. This guy is God's prophet. He's waiting on a mission from God. God tells him what to do, but instead, it'd be like Brother David just saying, no, not preaching today. Not going to preach. I know that's what I'm called to do, but anybody want to preach today? I'm not preaching. And just gets on a plane and goes somewhere else. And we would be a little shocked by that. But before we get too high and mighty, we might want to ask ourselves, has there ever been a time where God or Holy Spirit has said, hey, I need you to do something, and you resisted? It could be just something as simple as you saw a person that you felt was in need. I know we get a little skeptical of people that are, got signs and, will work for food or whatever they put up. But there could be a situation where you felt compelled and you felt God tell you to do something and you just ignored it. You didn't want to do it. Or you felt like that you were supposed to share the gospel with someone or invite them to church, even that simple. And you didn't take the opportunity to do it. It could be that way, or it could be something much bigger. So, we've all had times in our life where before we criticize Jonah too much, God has told us to do something and we went the opposite way. And by the way, when you're disobeying God, you may not be going geographically as far as what Noah was going to go, but in a way you are doing it. What is quite clear here is that Jonah is a flawed individual, and we're going to get more into that next week. We're going to get into the nuances of Jonah. This dude's got issues, serious issues. And it's going to be pretty explicit. And by the way, don't forget now, if you look at Jesus' 12 disciples, they had issues too. They did. People that follow the Lord have issues. It's not that we're not exempt from this. We have our own issues. So Jonah he's got some deep-seated problems that are in him. And God isn't looking for perfect people. God wants to use people that have flaws. He likes cracked pots. He can use you. Your crack may be up at the top and, he can still use the water down at the bottom. He just can't fill all the way up. It just depends. But he can use cracked pots. And Jonah is definitely one of those. Now, it appears, though, that as Don read this verse, that the response to God's command, go and preach or cry against Nineveh, his response is immediate. It doesn't seem like there's any delay. There might have been, but it doesn't seem like there is. He doesn't give it any thought. His immediate response is, that ain't happening. I am not going to Nineveh. And the first thing he does is he's going to, the Bible says that he paid for a fare, which, by the way, when God tells you to do something, he pays the fare. But when you disobey it, then you pay the fare. And it would have been a pretty hefty fare, because we'll talk about it in a minute about where he was going. But the first question I asked myself this week when I read this verse was, how did Jonah think this was going to turn out? Did he even think that out? Like, he knows who he's disobeying. Did he think this was going to play out well? He knows God. He knows the characteristics of God, but he's acting on impulse. He didn't think out how this was going to work out for him. And by the way, that's the way we are too. When we are tempted by sin, and there's a weakness that we all deal with those. We all have our temptations. Yours may be different from mine. When we're caught up by one of those, we don't think out the end. We don't want to. What's more important in that moment is satisfying this. And we want to do what we want to do, whether it's the eyes, the mind, the ears, the flesh, whatever it is. We want to satisfy that. We don't think it out about how it's going to end, because at that moment, that's not important. And Jonah here is the same thing.
Maybe it was the Curtis moment. Last week when the pastor was talking about that wasn't in the plan for him to break ribs, fall off the ladder, whatever, but he was going to use that. Somehow he was going to find God in the moment. So maybe Jonah just thought, if I go somewhere, he'll send something. Something will be there. I'll still have a God moment, but I'm not going there. It's not I'm sure hearing they had to go to Nineveh was not what he wanted to do. But he was like, I'll go somewhere else and God will use me. Just kind of took it upon himself.
Right. Well, in regards to Nineveh that you mentioned, it's to the east of Israel, and Tarshish is as far as you can go to the west.
Oh, he was getting away.
Yeah. So he really, he
away.
wasn't just disobeying, he was really disobeying. As if you can qualify disobedience.
Well, and to me, the thing that's in there is this away from the presence of the Lord. I'm like, okay, he is a man of God. He should know. God is omnipresent. He is everywhere. You cannot escape.
Great
the
segue.
Lord. You can't escape. He knows your situation. It's like you can run, but you can't hide.
So with that in mind, your husband Don has a great passage on that.
See? Good say that.
Psalms 139, verses 7 through 10. Don, tell us about that presence.
I won't tell you about it, but I'll read it.
This is a game show. Tell us about the prize.
Where can I go from your spirit? Question mark. Or where can I flee from your presence? Question mark. If I ascend to heaven, you are there. If I make my bed in Sheol, behold, you are there. If I take the wings of the dawn, if I dwell in the remotest part of the sea, even there your hand will lead me, and your right hand will lay hold of me.
There's no way to escape the presence of God. Did you get to verse 10?
10?
Yeah.
Even there your hand will lead me, and your right hand, that was 10, yeah.
Okay. So, yeah, I'm with you, Pam. And you would think, of all people.
He just reminds me of my daughter. She knows she's not supposed to do it, but she did do it. It's like a toddler. You just want to see how much they can push.
Well, and speaking of your daughter, so have you ever well, and you probably did this as a little girl too, as I know I did. Your mama tells you to do something, and you hide under the covers, and you think as long as you can't see her, she can't see you. Yeah. So, it's almost that kind of mentality that Jonah has here, that if I run from God, he can't see me. And there is no way to escape the presence of God. And no matter what we do, God knows. And you would think, though, that Jonah, of all people, because, listen, back in those days, not everybody had a copy of the Scriptures. But a prophet would. And he would know Psalms 139. It would have been there for him to read Psalms 139 by this time. Someone read verses 4 through 5. 4 and 5.
But the Lord hurled a great wind upon the sea, and there was a mighty tempest on the sea, so that the ship threatened to break up. Then the The mariners were afraid, and each cried out to his God, and they hurled the cargo that was in the ship into the sea to lighten it for them. But Jonah had gone down into the inner part of the ship and had lain down and was fast asleep.
Well, here begins, remember I told you there's the natural and the supernatural. Here begins the supernatural part of this story. Have any of you ever seen The Truman Show? Mm-hmm. Do y'all know that movie with Jim Carrey? And so in the end, you know, Jim Carrey's living in this, or the Truman, is Truman as they call him, is living in this fake world. His whole life has been on television from the time he's been born, and it's called The Truman Show, and all these people are addicted to watching him as a baby, and he's raised in this world that doesn't really exist. It's just a massive, what would you call that? It's just a fake world, and it has cameras everywhere that are showing his life. And in the end, you know, he's starting to pick up on what's going on. And he's on this boat on what he thinks is the ocean to get away from it. And the creator of the show, the producer, ends up generating this storm. And this storm just he turns the dial up to make the waves bigger, and the wind is blowing. And, you know, Truman's on this boat and he's trying to weather the storm. But eventually, I think at some point he realizes that there's only a storm where he is. It's not the whole ocean. It's just on him. And I think to an extent, that's kind of what's happening here. This is a storm that I know people want to help God and say, well, there's great storms in the Mediterranean that can pop up at any time. But no, this is supernatural. This is God creating the storm. And you get the impression from the verses you read there, Pam, that these sailors have not witnessed a storm like this before in all of the time that they've been sailing. This is a little unprecedented. This is a storm. It says that the ship was getting ready to break up. And it's to the point where they're so desperate, they're throwing the very cargo that they were paid to haul. You know, they're throwing their revenue out of the ship, because at this point, that doesn't matter to them. Yeah, they're going to lose their job, but right now they want to save their life. So they're really, really nervous, and they almost feel like this storm is personal, and you see they're starting to call upon their God. They almost think that it's directed to one of them. We're going to get into that more in just a minute. People want to think of God as a God of love. He's a God of love, and he is. But this same God is a God that can calm the storms, and he has done that. He calms storms, but God can also generate storms. And God, you know, I've been praying for, you know, there's 4 individuals that I've been praying for. I pray for hard every day, that God will get a hold of them and bring them to him. And I understand when I pray that God may generate a storm in their life to get their attention. And by the way, that may affect me. So I'm aware of that too, that storm may not just be affecting them. So people don't want to think of God as a judge that holds people accountable. Well, he will. So in these sailors' minds, they are in imminent danger. They think that at some point they're going to die. And where is Jonah?
Asleep.
Man, that is crazy, isn't it? Like, how could you? Now, when I was on a ship, when I was in the Marines are always, we're cargo, basically, to the Navy. And we, you know, that's how they look at us. And we always say, well, you wouldn't have a job if you weren't our taxi. So we get back at them. We call them squids. They call us jarheads. Well, you know, the Marines are usually at the bottom of the ship, which I'm thankful for, because I get seasick really bad. And when you're at the top of the ship where the officers are, what happens at the top of the ship? It rocks more. So at the bottom, it's kind of nice down there, because where my bunk was, it was right where the water line was, and it was, I mean, the best sleep I've ever had. And by the way, it gets dark at the bottom of the ship. It is dark, and I slept so good. This is back in the 80s. So Jonah here is at the bottom, but you would still think that, well, all this is going on, that how could he be sleeping while all this is happening above deck? We can't miss the graphic irony of this situation. While Jonah, the one person on that boat that knew the true God and actually had a relationship with him is at the bottom sleeping. There's a prayer meeting going on above him, but it's not real prayer. They're praying to gods that don't exist. But they're having a prayer meeting nonetheless with their gods, and whichever ones they were, while Jonah's asleep. And you can't miss the spiritual application of this. Because honestly, I feel like this is a picture of the church today. While the world is being rocked with tumultuous storms of what's going on, where are Christians? Where are we? We're not being obedient. We're at the bottom of the boat sleeping. It's time for us to wake up and to get up on the deck. People are searching. They're looking for all the answers in all the wrong places, like these sailors were. They're praying to gods that can't hear. So we need to wake up. One more thought before we leave this verse. Jonah thought that his sin, disobeying God, wasn't hurting anyone. Have you ever thought that about your sin? My sin don't affect anyone else. You might want to rethink that. These sailors would have an issue with that because their sin Jonah's sin is affecting them. And you would think this sin that Jonah's committing it's not a sin that really would affect anyone else when you think it out, but it is. So when Jonah got on their boat, Jonah's problem with God became their problem too. And every sin we commit has some effect on the people around us. Remember we talked about Achan's sin some weeks ago? Achan hid those things in his tent that he wasn't supposed to hide. Didn't think it would affect anybody. 36 soldiers died because of his sin, and his family was stoned. His sin affected people. Remember David? David took a census of the people when God told him not to, and he wanted to take a census out of pride to see how much strength he had. His sin cost 70,000 people to die because of his sin. Our sins do affect other people. Verse 6. Someone read verse 6.
So the captain approached him and said, "How is it that you are sleeping? Get up, call on your God. Perhaps your God will be concerned about us so that we will not perish."
I love what David
Your
Uzick,
God.
say again.
Your God.
That's right. David Uzick in his commentary said this about that verse. It must have seemed ironic to Jonah that the sailors demanded that he call on his God. His only reason for being on that ship was to escape from his God. I thought that was funny. So, here the prophet of God is sleeping while the pagans are having a prayer meeting. And the sailors' prayers have gone unanswered. So they're hoping that Jonah's God will respond. Verse 7. And they said everyone to his fellow, that's the sailors, "Come, let us cast lots, that we may know for whose cause this evil is upon us." So they cast lots, and the lot fell upon Jonah. As I mentioned earlier, the sailors saw this storm very differently. We get the sense that they thought this storm was directed personally at them. It felt different. These sailors had been through a lot of storms before. This is not new for them. Again, I told you the Mediterranean has storms, so these sailors would have been veterans of that. But this storm was different. It seemed really personal. And so there is a serious sense of urgency to find out why it's happening and who is it on the boat that's responsible for it. So again, I mentioned one supernatural part. The supernatural part was the storm. Here's the second supernatural thing. They cast lots. Do you think it's a coincidence that the lot fell on Jonah? That's the second supernatural part of this story. Verses 8 through 10. Then they said to him, that's the sailors, "Tell us, we pray you, for whose cause this evil is upon us. What is your occupation? Where do you come from? What is your country? And of what people are you?" And he said, "I am a Hebrew. I fear the Lord, the God of heaven, which made the sea and the dry land." Then the men were exceedingly afraid, and they said unto him, "Why have you done this?" For the men knew that he fled from the presence of the Lord because he told them. So you see in verse 10, the verses that we just read, verses 8 through 10, don't tell us the whole conversation that Jonah had. But if you notice in verse 10, it kind of says Jonah had told them. So in other words, he relayed the whole story. He said, God told me to go to Nineveh. And I thought, nah, I don't want to go. And he may have even told them why. While he's telling this story, by the way, the storms are pounding the ship. So it's like, to me, it's like, kind of, you have to remember that. You know, the boat's rocking while he tells this whole story. And there's no doubt in their minds, at least that's the impression I get, that they found the source of why the storm is happening. It's Jonah, and they know. And don't you love the question they ask him? Why did you do this? Here the world is, you've got pagans asking a Christian, why did you not obey God? And by the way, I think sometimes Christians do notice or non-Christians notice when Christians don't obey God. I mentioned this a few weeks ago. When a Christian, a person who everybody at work or everybody in the family knows is a Christian, says some kind of thing, a foul thing or a dirty joke, or says something or does something that's unethical, non-Christians notice it. They notice it. And these sailors are quick to call out Jonah. Why? Why did you disobey God? So it seems like, you notice that Jonah tells the sailors, I am a Hebrew. I fear the Lord. That's kind of weird. He says, I fear the Lord, the God of heaven. Well, if he does fear the Lord, his actions sure don't demonstrate it. Because if he feared the Lord, why is he trying to run from him? Doesn't he know, like I told you earlier when I read verse 1 and 2, how did he think this was going to end if he truly fears the Lord? And sometimes I think we say we fear the Lord and we acknowledge that we fear the Lord, but does our lifestyle really illustrate that we fear the Lord? Verses 11 through 12. And then they said to him, what shall we do to you that the sea may quiet down for us? For the sea had even grew more and more tempestuous. By the way, that's why they're talking. Things are getting even worse than what they were. And he said to them, pick me up and cast me forth into the sea, so the sea shall be calm unto you. For I know that for my sake this great tempest is upon you. Well, I'm not really sure what they were expecting Jonah to say when they asked that question. What should we do with you? But do you think they were expecting that answer? What do you think? What do you think they were expecting him to say? He tells them, throw me into the sea. That had to have caught him off guard, don't you think? Why do you think Jonah gave that answer? Why did Jonah just say, throw me into the sea?
So that's the fact they didn't really want to go in Nineveh?
I mean,
Okay.
This is a huge step away from everything they believe. Theirs is, oh, you just do a sacrifice and things are all right. Typically, the animal sacrifice, right? You're not going to have a whole, I'll just toss a grown man overboard, right? And that's kind of what God continues to do is, oh, you have these expectations? Nah, toss those out. And then he's going to do something different, right?
Well, you wonder if he actually thought they would do it. Because he could have just jumped in the sea. And they would have been fine. I was like, he could have just jumped in the sea.
That's a good point.
But the fact of that he told Phil to do it, that way, first of all, he's not committing suicide if he does that. He's not killing himself. But yet, I think maybe he didn't think they would actually do it.
Well, I don't know the answer to that. I wrote down 3 things. I wanted to hear what your thoughts were on it, and I don't know that mine are right. I just threw 3 things that I thought of, I wrote down. Perhaps he did have compassion on the sailors and was willing to give his life for them. I mean, he saw what they were going through, and he knew what his situation was, and he's like, I'm not going to let my life cost the lives of them. So maybe he had true compassion. I don't know. The second thing I wrote is that he knew God had prepared this storm because of him, and he knew he trusted God to do whatever he thought if he was in the water. And then the third thing I thought, well, maybe he, like you said, he didn't really want to go to Nineveh. And he was like, I'd rather die than go there. And you kind of get that impression as we get later on into this book. He hated the Ninevites. And I'm wondering if it was twofold, two-part. He didn't want to be responsible for the deaths of the sailors, and he still didn't want to obey God. I don't know. Verses 13 and 14. Nevertheless, the men rowed hard to get back to land, but they could not, for the sea grew more and more tempestuous against them. Do you see this? It's escalating. It was bad at the beginning, and it just keeps getting worse. Verse 14, and then they called out to the Lord. Notice it's Lord in capital letters. They're not calling out to their gods anymore. There's been these guys have had a conversion. They say, O Lord, let us not perish for this man's life. Lay not on us the innocent blood for you, O Lord. For you, O Lord, have done as... Let me try that again. O Lord, let us not perish for this man's life, and lay not on us innocent blood. For you, O Lord, have done as it has pleased you. So you see there, even though Jonah gave them a solution, they didn't want to do that. They didn't. And apparently they became true believers in the God of Jonah. Then verses 15 through 16, very quickly, I'm sorry, I'm going to try to wrap this up. Then they picked up Jonah, even though they didn't want to, and they hurled him into the sea, and the sea ceased from its raging. Then the men feared the Lord exceedingly. They offered a sacrifice to the Lord and made vows, and the Lord appointed a great fish to swallow up Jonah, and Jonah was in the belly of the fish 3 days and 3 nights. So, very quickly here, these men did not want to do this, but they saw no other option. So, as a last resort, they pick up Jonah and they throw him in the water after they've asked God, please forgive us. Don't hold this to our account. We believe in you. And immediately, when Jonah hits the water, the seas just become a mill pond. Immediately. This is the other part of the supernatural. This is now the third supernatural thing we see happen in this story. This would be a moment the sailors would never forget. And you see what they did. They immediately made a sacrifice. Now, I don't know how you would make a sacrifice on the ship. I don't think they had any animals at this point. I'm pretty sure anything they had was thrown overboard. So some people think that the sacrifice was done once they hit land. But either way, what we do know is they made a vows to God. They committed their life to God. And they became true followers of Jesus or of God at this point. And I do believe we'll see them in heaven. As for Jonah, we'll get to this next week. But when he hit the water, as far as they were concerned, he was dead because he's not visible to them. They throw them in the water and he goes down. And I don't know if they see what happened in verse 17 or not. We don't know. But God's not done with Jonah. And we're going to see that next week. We'll get to the fourth supernatural thing that happens in this story.
Well, and one of the cool things about that is that even in his disobedience, others came to the Lord. Even in his disobedience, others were saved. So
God got the
glory out of it.
Yes, he did. And God will always get the glory out of it. And I pray for that in all the bad tragedies. This week, with the big plane crash, I've prayed that the Lord will get the glory out of that somehow. I don't know how God will, but I've prayed that. And so that's a great point. Well, we will continue this